Hi, friends, and welcome back. We're on day number 11 and we are trudging right along. So, the prompt for the Ugly Art Club's 5-minute challenge today is dip dye. So, originally, my idea was I thought it would be so cool to kind of dip and dye some fabric, but I'm trying as much as possible to stick within that 5-minute time period. We know that I am not usually successful with this, but the idea in my mind still is to kind of move quicker than I normally would, make quicker decisions, and just be better overall about creating right there in the moment and being inspired by what's around me. So, I do several things to help me along in this process. I often have a color scheme picked out ahead of time. I gather some materials around me on my desk. And that way, when I'm creating and I'm making decisions to move quicker, I can just take a look at what's around me and be inspired by whatever is going on. And that helps you to make those quicker decisions. So instead of doing the fabric dip dye like I wanted to, originally, I thought, well, I haven't used any drywall tape in the first 10 days, which is super surprising. I love that supply, that piece of paper I did that has the holes in it. So what I did is I took some of my Quink ink and I did put it into a cap that was on a jar. I just saved the cap of it. It's a nice shallow container. And then I dipped the paper right into it, and I wanted more of that ombre effect that you would get if you dip dye something and let it soak. And so I went with the spray bottle, sprayed it and let it drip down, and then set it aside to dry. So that's another thing that I think with the 5-minute timer helps me move faster. Instead of sitting there and waiting for it to dry, I move on to the next thing and hopefully it then can come back and it will be dry by the time I'm ready to use it. Another fun thing that was unexpected is I wanted that drippy ombre effect, and then I put a piece of paper underneath it so it would kind of catch all of that pigment. I didn't want to waste any of it, so I wanted to kind of capture it on another piece of paper. What was then fun is I took my 4x6 piece of cardstock that I'm using as the work page for this project, and I dipped it directly in that pool, which gives it a totally different look if I were to just add the ink directly onto that 4x6 white page. So it's really fun to experiment, and when you're working more in the moment like that, you get those ideas and you're just more inspired to just go with it, I think, rather than maybe thinking through all of the consequences and maybe having the risk of overthinking what you're doing. So I added in some pencil scribble marks and the white gesso. I love the way that that gesso looks with that ink. That ink is really fun. I use Sumi inks and different things like that, but this Quink ink is more of a Payne's gray color. It's not labeled as that when you buy it, but it comes across as that Payne's gray when you add water with it, which I really love. And it has that blue kind of hue to it as well, which I have been obsessed with that color scheme for over the past month. I've made 4 different journals, I think, in those colors with lots of different papers. And so it was really a great opportunity for me to use those colors again on this spread. I used them back in day 1. So make sure you go back and watch that if you like this color scheme as well and see what I ended up with for day number 1. As always, I try to link the products and the supplies that I use down in the description below if I know where they're from. That way, if you're inspired by them as well, you can find out what I'm using. So, as always, if I missed anything, please leave a comment and let me know down below. And also, while you're at it, follow the channel, subscribe. That way you can be notified of new videos. If you're new here, I would love to connect with you. So leave a comment. Let me know how you found me, if this is your first time watching me or the first time you visited the channel. So all right, so I took the adhesive off the back of that drywall tape. That's another reason I love to use it as well, is you don't have to use any other adhesive. You can just take off that adhesive backing and it sticks right onto whatever you're working with. So I think it's a really fun look. I like the see-through with the holes appearance, but you still get the dark to light that I envisioned for the dip dye prompt. I want to add on my prompt tag here, um, and just deciding now where to put that. I wanted to rip around it a little bit more. Originally, when I cut out my prompts, I did it just with some scissors, so I wanted a more organic edge to it. And to make it stand out from the background a little bit more, I put some white gesso down on the backing, and now I'm going to put this over top of it. It kind of creates a little highlighted effect around it. So that's kind of fun to think about some of those aspects before you put something down that you want to highlight or draw more attention to, rather than always doing it after. Changing up the order in which you do things can really make things more exciting and change things in an unexpected way, I think. Adding in some more of that ink that's left over, just giving it a little bit more of a grungy appearance. And of course, after I dried it, then I went ahead and I added more water, more liquid. So I'm just hitting that with the heat gun just a little bit more. And just as a final touch, I want to add in some white art marks. And my favorite way to do that, hands down, is with this white correction pen. I it makes it so easy to do little marks, and it leaves a bit of a texture on the page, which personally I love. Any time I can find ways to add in that texture, I'm happy about it. I wanted to add in a little bit of stitching, so I took it over to the sewing machine and just did a couple messy stitches back and forth across where that prompt is, and then went back in with the white correction pen and did a few more marks overlapping so that the whole thing just feels cohesive with one another. Okay, so now I'm working on the second spread, and what I'm doing with this, and the reason why I decided to do a second spread beyond the 5-minute challenge, is it's another challenge kind of for myself. So when I work in a journal, typically I work on the left and the right side all at one time, or the top and the bottom at the same time, because I like everything to feel really cohesive. That's total personal preference. I appreciate very greatly when other people do work in their journals and the left side is completely different from the right. No matter how loose I am with my art practice, there are just some things that I am particular about. And no matter how hard I try, those two sides, I like them to go together. But instead of spending the time during the 5 minutes here trying to do two full sides, two spreads, I decided, well, during the 5 minutes, I'm going to focus on the one. And then once that's done, can I challenge myself to come up with another page that's cohesive to the first one? My goal was to keep it relatively simple, not to do too much. It's not meant to be a whole nother big spread, I should say, but can I make it look as if they totally belong together? I think this is really great for my artistic muscles and just exploring of taking in some of those elements that we did from the beginning and bringing them in for round two. And this would be great also if I were to come back later and do it. I just happen to be doing it now when all the supplies are still out. But sometimes if we want to work in our journal and we just want to work on one side, this is then a great skill to work on that we could come back at a later time and make them still look like they really go together. So I used some of that ink that was already spilled on the page, and then I wanted a more bold look, so I added in some more ink, and then with my white gesso, added in some marks as well. So I ended up getting a lot of liquid there on the page, and so I had sopped some of that up with just some fabric that I had laying around. So that's those two spreads, and I really love the way that they look together. They're really moody. So I'm going to take you along now. The two spreads are technically done, but I left the camera running because I still have ink that I have to use. And in my studio, I don't let anything go to waste. I just can't help it. I have to use it all in some way or another. So I thought that I would show you what I would do if I had this left over. I do this with paints. It doesn't matter that this is ink. I have some papers that I'm going to make, and I end up actually dyeing some fabric as well. So I thought I would show you what that looks like for me when I'm just using some of those supplies. So some of my favorite papers and things that I make actually come out of instances like this, where I'm just using up supplies from the main page. And now this piece of marked paper will be perfect to use later in another spread, in another journal, to use in one of my handmade art journals, all of those things. So I ended up having a lot of pigment ink left in that cap. So I did go ahead and pour some of it back in. I don't think that I tainted it with any paint or anything. I think I was pretty careful. So I let myself just pour that back in. And now I want to dye some fabric. So I poured out most of the ink back into it, but of course there's the residual still left in that cap, and a little bit goes a really long way. So I have some fabric here, and it's actually from a bed sheet, so I'm using just some recycled textiles, and added in some water so that it spreads more easily. And now, just to kind of keep track of my mess here, I'm using a cookie sheet so it all just goes into that, and I'm not absorbing in onto the paper underneath that I already had on the desk. This ink really does stain, and I wanted to get in there with it. I always think that I can be really careful and not get it all over my hands, but it does stain and stay for several days, so I decided to be responsible and put on some gloves. Um, but this is just a fun way now to get some fabric, and I'll definitely use this in future journals, spreads, or on a journal cover. This is just how I build up my stash for future products. So a lot of times it's just that aftermath, and fun things can really come out of it, I think. So I'm just sopping up any of the excess that I have laying around, and my piece of fabric is really pretty wet here, so I'm going to actually take it and kind of roll it up and rub some of that ink and that pigment off. I'm just exploring as I go. I did not know what it would look like, but I think it's really fun how this turned out. And I just want to encourage you to explore. If you have leftover supplies, what can you do with them that will make your life easier in the future, that you will have those supplies left over? So I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.